Genesis chapter 31 is a long, eventful chapter that follows Jacob from his last days in a 20-year career as Laban's servant. It ends with Jacob standing with his wives and children as a free man in the borderlands of the promised land of Canaan. This chapter, though, begins with two revelations. Jacob learned that Laban's sons were dangerously angry with him for taking such a large portion of Laban's profits, and that he had, also lost favor with his Muko / or aka father-in-law Laban. Second, God spoke to Jacob once more and commanded him to return to his own people in Canaan, and that he also promised that he would be with him in this journey and all throughout. Anyhow, I will read details about that in verses 1 to 3. Jacob, he knew that he had to leave, and as much as he was afraid to. He was afraid, that his wives, that is Leah and Rachel, his daughters, his sons, weren't probably allowed to live with him, and so he thought he probably wouldn't accept they wouldn't let him go, and likewise even his uncle, aka, or you could also say his Muko or his father-in-law, wouldn't let him go. Regardless, he immediately sent for his wives to see if they would support his new move that he has in place. And so he stood before them and he made a case before them. And in one of the ways he made this case, he says, one is that Laban no longer favors him. Even after 20 years of faithful service, Laban continually kept on cheating Jacob. In fact, later on we shall see that he changed Jacob's, salary or wages almost over 10 times. Hey, for once, Rachel and Leah, they did agree, despite their long-standing rivalry, that described their decisions bitterly. But hey, for the first time here, they stood and agreed upon what their husband had to say. Now, they won't get any inheritance from Laban. Anyhow, so they will just go, because one of the statements they say that what else is left in our house, in the house of our father for us. So Jacob, he decided to skip any confrontation with his father-in-law, Laban. In the past, Laban had talked Jacob into seemingly terrible agreements. Though God has sort of blessed Jacob tremendously, even under all these, treacherous circumstances. Worse, Jacob is concerned that Laban may forbid Jacob to live with all the people and probably even the property that he already has. And he probably sees as ultimately belonging, to him, to Laban. Jacob doesn't he doesn't give Laban the chance to object, of course. Instead, what does he do? He packs up his things, he organizes his house, he puts together his kids, and boom, he decides to leave in a hurry. 3 days later, it was told to Laban that, hey, Jacob is gone. So what did Laban do? He saddled up his kinsmen, and then he gave a chase to Jacob. He later on caught up with him and his large company in the hill country of Gilead. Gilead, unexpectedly, of course, in the night, he had a warning from God. And God appeared to him in a dream and he told him, hey, you should not say anything good or bad to Jacob. In other words, leave Jacob alone. In short, Laban, of course, later on, when he did meet with Jacob, he did moderate his words. He moderated what he had to say, to Jacob. Instead of expressing his wrath, Laban, of course, he sounded hurt. If Jacob had only told him he was leaving, so he says, apparently he would have threw a party for him, a farewell party. Laban spoke as if Jacob tried to steal Laban's chance to kiss his daughters and grandchildren goodbye. He understood that Jacob longed for his father's love and household. But why did Jacob steal Laban's house gods? As we're going to see in verses 22 to 30. Of course, Jacob answered Laban honestly. He thought Laban would take his daughters, Jacob's wives, away from him by force. He also insists he did not take Laban's gods or idols. Of course, he did not know that Rachel had done exactly that. Jacob put his beloved, he put his beloved's life on the line. I mean, when he foolishly said that if anybody is found with those idols, that person should not live. Hey, what if Rachel had been found with those idols? He didn't know, of course, that Rachel had actually stolen them. But man, that was risky. That was foolish. It reminds me of what? It reminds me of King Saul when he sees in this camp and his son Benjamin. No. What was his boy's name? They were fighting and the Philistines were scattering, they were running, and then he said something stupid. If anybody eats food that day, that person should see to it that is killed. And then only to find his son being, eating of the honeycomb. But hey, this is literally the same thing. It also reminds me of that, that soldier in the Bible. I'm not sure where exactly it's written, who went to battle and he told the Lord, if you give me victory, whatever comes out of my house first, that I shall give to you. Little did he know it would be actually his daughter coming out first. To his thoughts, he thought probably it would be the goats or, the lamb. Probably those were the animals that came out first early in the morning. But hey, to his surprise, when he came back from the battle, only to find it was his daughter coming out. So sometimes we don't actually need to give any vows before the Lord. But hey, Jacob here, he said something really very stupid, very foolish, that if anybody is found with them, that person should not live. So he went ahead and he left Laban to search the camp. However, due to Rachel's quick thinking and deception, Laban found absolutely nothing. Feeling righteously indignant, Jacob finally expressed all of his fury to Laban. Not just about the idol search, but also about 20 years of shabby treatment in spite of Jacob's faithful service. And at that, only God's protection and blessings had kept him from leaving empty-handed to return to his own. In other words, if it hadn't been God to be upon him, if it hadn't been God to protect and watch over him and bless him, he literally would have left empty-handed. However, Laban disagreed, and he still believed that his daughters and their children and all that Jacob had was actually his. Why? Because he still took Jacob for a servant or a slave, what you'd probably say. But because Jacob's God, our God, the Almighty, warned Laban, though, Laban won't fight for them. Instead, he offered an alternative, both to protect himself against him ever coming back to claim his possession, but also so as to, take control over the situation. He proposed a covenant that both men would swear never to cross over the point where they stand in order to do any other harm. We'll start about that in verses 43 to 50, to which Jacob, of course, agreed. He had no choice, but he said yes to that. Now, the covenant was made and recognized with the building of a heap of stones, a sacrifice upon the altar, and the sharing of a beautiful meal. Finally, Laban rode off, and Jacob turned his face to his homeland as a free man. We'll see that in verses 51 to 55. That is basically the summary of Genesis chapter 31. To find the full episode of this, please go to our website. That is www.abdiministries.org. You can also find the full episode on our YouTube channel, that is at Abdi Ministries, or you could also get that on what? Spotify. Yes, on Spotify. Yeah, on Spotify or even on our social media pages, that is Facebook and Twitter. You simply search for Abdi Ministries. Otherwise, let's dig in to the detail.